Welcome to Question of the Week. This is the Facebook Live session where I take on your science faith questions Mondays, 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 12:30 in the afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. This week's question comes from my Facebook friend Eli, a remarkable young man who lives in Israel, and he wants to know, why do humans have the palmaris longus wrist muscle? This muscle is, by all accounts, non-functional. Many scientists consider it to be a vestigial structure, the leftover remnants of our evolutionary history as human beings. And so the question is, can we explain the presence of the palmaris longus wrist muscle in humans from a creation model / intelligent design perspective? I'm going to take on that question in just a minute, but before I do that, I want to remind each and every one of you, if you're watching this broadcast, please take just a moment and check in the comments section. Say hi. Let us know who you are and where you're watching from. This information is valuable for us to have, and on top of that, it allows me to get to know you, and I really do want to find out who you are and why you are interested in science faith issues. Also, take a moment to react to this broadcast. Use the like button. Let us know if you like this broadcast, or if you don't, offer your suggestions for improvement in the comments section. And then finally, if you want to offer your perspective on this particular question, namely, why do humans have the palmaris longus muscle and how it factors into the creation evolution debate, I want to hear your perspective, particularly if you are someone who disagrees with my viewpoint. I want to create environments on my Facebook pages, my public figure page and my personal Facebook page, where people can discuss science faith issues without restriction, without censorship. So please, again, let us hear your thoughts on why God would create human beings with the palmaris longus wrist muscle. And by the way, the last time we did a broadcast, which was last Monday, a number of you took the time to check in and say hi. And I just want to acknowledge a few of you and let you know again that I am paying attention to those people who are interested in the work that we do at Reasons to Believe and who interact with me through my Facebook pages. The people that checked in last week included Rohan James from South Ozone Park, New York, Jenny Wynn from Illinois, John Drack from Michigan, and Billy Grimes from Nashville. So again, please take a moment and check in if you're watching this broadcast. Okay, let's go ahead and get to Eli's question, which is a really, really good question. Because again, Eli asked, why do human beings have the palmaris longus muscle? What would its purpose be in human beings? And what motivates this question is this idea that for many scientists, the palmaris longus wrist muscle is a vestigial structure. That is, it is the leftover remnants of our evolutionary history, and the fact that we possess this muscle indicates that we must have emerged through evolutionary processes. That is, there is no way for a creation model or an intelligent design framework to actually account for the presence of vestigial structures. And of course, this is really very interesting because the palmaris longus wrist muscle in humans, at least for most people, is a non-functional muscle. And we can find this muscle in other mammals. In some mammals that have claws, for example, this muscle will retract the skin, exposing the claws. In orangutans, this muscle is used to help the ape to grip tree branches. Orangutans move through trees in a swinging manner. This is called brachiation, and this muscle plays a key role in the grip that orangutans use, again, to grab a hold of tree branches. We also see this muscle in gorillas, in chimps, and in humans, but in gorillas, chimps, and in humans, this muscle displays highly variable structure. and there's a number of different variations with respect to this structure. And the argument goes that these variable structures are a reflection of the fact that this muscle is no longer functional, that this muscle is vestigial, that it seems to be on its way of undergoing non-adaptive evolutionary transformations, rendering it essentially non-functional. And in fact, in humans, not only does this muscle display a variety of different types of shapes and forms, but also about 25% of humans lack the palmaris longus muscle in either one or both wrists. And so this is part of the argument for why, again, this looks as if it is a vestigial structure, that humans can actually lose this muscle without having any kind of consequence. On top of that, the tendon that is attached to this muscle is oftentimes used in reconstructive surgeries. So, for example, if somebody blows out, if somebody ruptures a tendon in their wrist, many times the tendon that is associated with the palmaris valgus muscle will be used as a replacement for that damaged tendon. And so the fact that scientists are able to, or sorry, not scientists, but doctors are able to utilize this muscle in that way, again, reinforces this argument that this is a vestigial structure. So the question is, given this, on the surface, seemingly compelling case for evolution, just based on the distribution of this muscle and its functions in orangutans, chimpanzees, gorillas, and humans, or lack of function, and its variability and its absence in humans, and again, its utility in reconstructive surgeries without having any consequence for losing that tendon that is associated with the palmaris longus wrist muscle, many people would argue the only way to make sense of this is that human beings are the product of an evolutionary history. So how can we make sense of this from a creation model standpoint? Well, that's a great question. And in a sense, there are two different ways that the presence of this muscle could be explained in a creation model / intelligent design framework. And the first response, I think, is rather predictable, that maybe this muscle actually has function and we've yet to actually discover any function for this muscle. Now, this, of course, is a claim that largely is unsubstantiated. I did a literature search, and to the best of my capacity, it wasn't exhaustive literature search, but it was a literature search. I couldn't find any instances in which function was attributed to the palmaris longus muscle. However, just a few minutes ago, Aaron Kren, sent me a title of an article published in 2010 in a journal called Clinical Anatomy, where a team of researchers actually argued that the palmaris longus muscle actually plays a role in strengthening thumb abduction, and therefore they argue that this muscle is actually functional. So this is the only paper that I've been able to find that indicates function for the palmaris longus muscle, but it is a very interesting article that suggests indeed there very well could be a functional role that this muscle is playing in humans, and that we've yet to discover it until this particular paper is published. But I haven't seen anything following up in the 7 years since this paper was published that indicates function. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't, again, function for this muscle. So good job, Aaron, for finding that. That was an article that I was simply unaware of. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that we didn't have any kind of evidence at this point for function for the palmaris longus muscle. Well, we still could argue that maybe that function will one day be discovered. And in fact, there's precedence for this because there's a number of vestigial structures associated with human anatomy, wisdom teeth, the coccyx, the tailbone, and even the appendix that for a long time were regarded as being non-functional, and in recent years we've discovered functional roles for these so-called vestigial structures. And I think the appendix really is a wonderful example that parallels the palmaris longus muscle in a number of different ways. And I've been doing this long enough. I've been involved in scientific apologetics and Christian apologetics long enough to remember a time when we didn't really have an answer to why humans had an appendix. And it was only when we discovered the importance of the human microbiome that we realized what the function of the appendix is. It's essentially a storehouse of bacteria that are used to repopulate the intestinal tract when it becomes evacuated as a result of bouts of diarrhea. It's very critical that that microbiome is repopulated in the intestinal tract because those bacteria play a key role in preventing the colonization of our intestinal tract with pathogenic bacteria. They also play a role in digesting food and helping to absorb nutrients and things like that. And so repopulating the intestinal tract is really important. And the fact that people develop appendicitis is now understood to be essentially a reflection of the fact that in the first world, in the developed world, we live in more or less hyperhygiene environments where things like diuretic bouts are rather rare. In developing parts of the world, people don't develop appendicitis, but people also suffer from diarrhea to a much greater extent, where the appendix is actually serving its function. It's only in a developed world context where the appendix is not functional that that appendicitis develops. And people have long argued again that it must be vestigial because we can remove the appendix when appendicitis develops without any consequence. But there's now emerging data that indicates an association between appendectomies and the onset of certain types of colorectal cancer. So the fact of the matter is, removing the appendix is not without consequence, but the parallel between the appendix and the palmaris longus is rather intriguing in that sense. And again, the fact that Aaron Kren discovered this paper suggesting function for the palmaris longus muscle with respect to abduction essentially reinforces the idea that maybe what we think to be vestigial structures actually turn out to be functional after all. And this is a prime example. Maybe when people actually undergo this wrist reconstruction surgery that they do lose strength in their thumb abduction. Maybe that is generally without consequence, but to say that it's not functional now, again, is very difficult to sustain in light of the fact that there is some evidence that maybe this muscle does perform function. But the point is this, is that oftentimes people declare rather complex anatomical, physiological, genetic, or biochemical systems to be non-functional, when in fact that function is just simply hidden from us because we lack a full understanding of that system. And the palmaris longus now looks like it could very well be another one of those examples. What I'd like to do, however, is suggest another way to account for the presence of vestigial structures, not just the palmaris longus muscle, but vestigial structures or so-called vestigial structures that are found in not only human anatomy, but found throughout the biological realm. Because this idea of appealing to function is effective in some instances. In many instances, that appeal isn't effective, and it could very well be that there are parts of our anatomical makeup, parts of the anatomical makeup of other animals that really don't have a functional utility. Does that mean, if that's truly the case, that a creation model / intelligent design framework can account for structures that are truly vestigial in that sense? And to me, I think the answer is no. But it requires us thinking about design in a very different way than we're accustomed to thinking about design as Christian apologists, as creationists, as ID proponents. And to appreciate that different way to think about design, I would like to call attention to a debate that was happening in biology in the early 1800s. There were two schools of thought that were in competition with each other in terms of explaining the design in biology. In the early 1800s, biology was a teleological discipline. That is, everybody saw the design in biology as being real design that reflect the work of a mind, that brought that design, that brought biological systems into existence. The debate was not was that design real or apparent, which is the debate that happens today among ID proponents / creationists and evolutionary biologists. But the debate then was whether or not it was function or form that were the most important characteristics to consider when thinking about the design in biology. In the United Kingdom, the school of thought that reigned was that of function. Functionality was the organizing framework to think about biological design. On the continent, in Europe, the prevailing thought was form was more important than function. And in the 1800s, a biologist by the name of Sir Richard Owen sought to unify both schools of thought in a theoretical framework. And Owen was no lightweight. He was the most prominent biologist in his day in the United Kingdom. Owen is considered the father of comparative anatomy. He elaborated the concepts of homology and analogy. Owen coined the term dinosaur. Owen is responsible for developing the modern day natural history museum system. And so he was a very important figure in the history of biology. And in fact, Owen argued that shared biological features among organisms that group together reflect an archetypical design. And he referred to those features as homologous features or homologies. And the idea here is this, according to Owen, is that organisms that naturally group together may have anatomical and physiological features that superficially look different, that perform different functions, but fundamentally they're built around the same design. He called those homologous structures. He also noted that organisms that do not naturally group together may have superficially similar structural features and functional features that perform the same function, but actually are below the surface are built around different designs. He called those analogous structures or analogies. And for Owen, the homologies reflected an archetypical design that existed in the mind of the first cause that was then functionally manifested in the created order. Now for Owen, however, he argued that it's remarkable that a creator, that a first cause, that a mind could actually build a wide range of functional designs using the same archetypical plan. And for him, he saw that as design on the highest order. That for Owen, clearly function was very important and an indication of design, but to build that design, again, based on an archetypical framework, for Owen was design squared. And I'd like to read something that Owen wrote. He said this: "The satisfaction felt by the rightly constituted mind must ever be great in recognizing the fitness of parts for their appropriate function." So here Owen is basically arguing, when you see elegant functional systems that are ideally suited for their role for that organism, that bespeaks of design. That is a very impressive thing to see. But he goes on to say this: "But when this fitness is gained, as in the great toe of the foot of man and the ostrich, by a structure which at the same time betokens harmonious concord with a common type, that is, with an archetype, the prescient operations of the one cause of all organization becomes strikingly manifested to our limited intelligence." And so often Christian apologists, intelligent design proponents, creationists latch on to function as being the most important feature of biological systems and build their apologetics, build their argument for God's role, for design, around function. And in a sense, the first response that I gave you to why is there a palmaris longus muscle in the human wrist is an illustration of that approach where function is preeminent. But what Owen is teaching us is that there's another way to think about design, and that framework would be one that focuses on form more so than function. That what is the most important is the archetype, the archetypical plan, as opposed to the function. Not that function is ever disregarded, but the archetype becomes all important. And in fact, the way in which we oftentimes think about God as a creator is by thinking about God as an engineer. That would be the emphasis on function. Another end of this spectrum would be to think about God as the artist. That would be a model where form becomes more important. But in a sense, you could really think of God as an architect, where it's function and form united that really are what's the most important. And so that's how Owen saw God's role as creator, as function and form united, where he gave a nod to form being more important or overriding function. Now, in light of this is where we're getting to the idea of vestigial structures. Owen and his colleagues who argued for archetype biology recognized they were fully aware of vestigial structures in their day. They were consummate anatomists. In fact, they all knew, for example, that the whale had a pelvis, that there were structures in human anatomy that seemed to be non-functional. But for those people that were espousing archetype biology, this was not a challenge to their model, but rather was readily accommodated by their model. It actually flowed out of the very essence of their model. Why? Because the argument would be, of course human beings have the palmaris longus muscle, or a whale has a pelvis, because to not have those structures would be to violate the archetype. And a creator would never violate the archetype because of the artistic commitment to form and the intersection of form and function. That is, it's possible that there would be structural features that humans and other animals would possess that wouldn't have function, but were there because of the adherence to the archetype. And think about this in terms of architectural structures. There are structures that are beautiful, where some of the features of those structures are there for functional purposes, others are for the beauty, others are there for both beauty and function, but there are some features that are there for the beauty alone. And that isn't considered to be a poorly designed system, but in fact, we marvel at architectural designs that display all three types of characteristics: function, form and function united. And so why shouldn't we think about human biology and the biology of other organisms in those terms? And so I would actually argue that maybe as Christian apologists, as creationists, as ID proponents, our view of design is rather impoverished because we've spent so much effort focusing on function. And I think what Owen is teaching us is that we really need to bring to the table design models, creation models that actually give a nod to not only function, but also to form, and recognize that those features can be united or they can be distinct. And if out of that robust framework, we no longer have challenges of vestigial structures that we have to deal with, because those structures naturally are an embodiment of our design framework. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and bring things to a close. Thank you so much, Aaron Kren, for jumping in and alerting me to the paper about the functional role of the palmaris longus muscle in thumb abduction, and that the presence of that muscle adds to the strength of thumb abduction. So I appreciate that very much. I really appreciate everybody's comments and thoughts when they offer perspectives on articles and podcasts and videos that I post on my Facebook page, both public figure and private pages. I really enjoy hearing from you, hearing your perspective, even if your perspective is different than mine. It's much, much appreciated. And so please continue to add those comments. I invite you to offer your perspective on vestigial structures and what do they mean for the case for creation and evolution and intelligent design. Also, take a moment if you're watching this broadcast to react to it, to like it, to offer suggestions how we could improve it. Also, don't forget to check in the comment section. Let us know where you're watching from, who you are. Again, I really want to get to know those people that are watching this broadcast. And then finally, if you want to have a question considered for a future broadcast, please go ahead and post that question in the comment section. Or you can go to my Facebook page, whether it's my public figure page or my personal page and post the comment directly on my page, or the question directly on my page, or you can private message me. I read all the questions and comments that people provide me. I'm very interested in what you have to say. Unfortunately, I can't respond and react to everything that is posted on my pages that is sent my way. Nevertheless, what you have to say, your concerns, your questions are very important, and I take them seriously. So anyway, thank you so much for your participation in this live broadcast. I look forward to the next time we get together. And in the meantime, I just pray that God is richly blesses you, that he is present in your life, that you feel and are aware of his grace and his mercy. And I want to leave you with one final thought, as I do every time we do a broadcast. The more that we know about science, the more that we have reasons to believe this is definitely the case when it comes to vestigial structures. And for now, over and out.